Okay, so we're sitting here in Poland, in Gdansk, Poland, and we were just talking about the toxicity of social media at the present moment. And so maybe we can just dive right in, and I can ask you guys, what do you think are some toxic things about social media these days?
Yeah, I would say definitely the whole way they've figured out the algorithm of how to make people react to things and get as many shares as possible. With basically they started manipulating the news feed so that it would show you the things that make you angry, because they figured out that anger is the emotion that makes you most eager to share things, and especially if you're a woman, apparently. So they started targeting these like different demographics in ways that trigger you to make your newsfeed about that. And the same thing with suddenly this thing that was supposed to be about family and friends is now about just political commentary and memes, like funny pictures, just people sharing things rather than showing their lives.
And even if people are using it just to show their lives, I think that can even be toxic, because it's not about just experiencing something for yourself or sharing it with the people that are physically with you, but you kind of like immediately seek validation. Like you put something out there and if it doesn't get much attention, it kind of makes you feel like, oh, maybe it wasn't as nice as I thought. Or it's just it's kind of just training us to seek approval outside of ourselves, which is the last thing we need, I think. Yeah, so it's a distraction from yourself. People use it to numb themselves.
Yeah, it's like when you're out doing something, you're having a good day, you're going to a restaurant, you're out with your friends, it's like, oh yeah, let's show this to Facebook. Like you got to take a selfie with everyone in it, or take a picture of your food. It becomes, it's not about the moment anymore. It's like showing the moment to other people later. Instead of living, you're just trying to make a picture of living.
Yeah, that reminds me. So what I'm hearing so far is, for one, there's like the Facebook eye that you just kind of touched on. I've heard this term as like it's this endless constant awareness of like the eye of social media, sort of watching your life, and you're sort of always on some level looking for the next like profile picture or selfie opportunity, which makes it quite hard to really live in the moment and soak in and savor experiences. And I heard Chelsea mention the tendency of people to use social media looking for, I mean, it's basically a tool that's kind of designed to push our buttons, that like to provoke our human tendency to yearn for external validation, and like fuel that so that we're just getting in this cycle of like waking up and immediately checking our notifications and sort of in this endless loop of what can I post next to get more like brownie points from everybody. And it's hard to imagine that that's really could possibly be psychologically healthy. And then Emil, you mentioned as well that the algorithms of Facebook and some of these behemoth corporations, they're basically optimized to maximize advertising revenue. So they're basically just machines that are sort of trying to figure out how can we get the most number of eyeballs on this site for the greatest amount of time every day. And they've sort of found out that one of the best ways to do that is to push everybody's like fear and anger buttons, like just fuck with our limbic systems basically. And so you end up getting all this political infotainment and manufactured outrage and clickbait and stuff that just sucks people into these cycles of like flame wars and comment wars and just getting embroiled in this endless kind of arguing, and makes people end up feeling like they need to keep tuning in because the buttons that are being pushed are sort of like deep survival based buttons. So they're thinking like, oh, I feel this is giving me information about something I should be afraid of. I need to keep tuning into this to make sure I'm aware of these threats to my well-being.
Or I need to defend the right side.
Or I should want this thing. It's
That's one of the reasons I deleted my Facebook, because a lot of the times when I would go on there, I would just see people arguing with each other over what I think is really trivial stuff. I just see them as like acting out the lines of what they kind of want them to, you know. It's like, here's what will piss people off today, and then people just take the bait and fight with each other. I've seen people unfriend their family members and like 10-year friendships over just like different political opinions about the Target bathroom.
I spoke to one woman who said she didn't talk to her mother for a year after she found out her mother voted for Trump, and so this political stuff has become so utterly divisive, and these media companies are actually using this.
It's by design, I think.
It is by design, because once you start getting that kind of tribal identity drive, you want to like take a side and fight for it and make it into good and bad people, and kind of telling yourself that you're doing the world a service when you're really not.
It's shadow
projection. That's a very like addictive thing. It can help people sell you all sorts of stuff. It's the irony of it is like the people getting into these like kind of politically activist kind of mindset and then buying all these things that are actually produced by the opposite of what they're supposed to be fighting for. It's like, we want better wages, so here we're wearing sweatshop made t-shirts.
Yeah, and a lot of social media stuff is just, the negative stuff is just like shadow projection. Like, you want to avoid your own pain or discomfort or anger or sadness about whatever, so you just find an enemy out there to fight, and you're just finding an outlet for all your bad stuff, and it's not actually good. You
have someone to blame. You don't need to take responsibility for your own suffering or your own struggles or your own bad actions.
Yeah, so these media and news companies are actually playing on our deep-seated human tendency to want to not look at our own difficult emotions and our own shadow and the parts of ourselves that we reject. We have this deep tendency to not look at that stuff and instead to project it out onto some external entity or enemy in the world, so that we can say, that thing is the problem, that political party is the problem, that institution is the problem, I'm not the problem is over there. And they're actually playing on this tendency to just create these political tribes that think that the libtards are the problem, or the Nazis are the problem.
The baby boomers.
And these terms kind of...
The patriarchy.
Yeah. These terms kind of start becoming meaningless. It's like, it's if you're getting caught up in the particular vocabulary, you'll overlook like the meta pattern, which is really just like, when you see a group of people that is extraordinarily convinced that they're the good guys and that the bad guy is out there somewhere, then you can be sure that you're seeing this endless historical human pattern of basically projecting our shadow onto some enemy. And I always come back to this Nietzsche quote where he says, like, he who fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. Because that really summarizes this nugget that, like, the most dangerous position to be in as a human is thinking, I'm one of the good guys, I'm on the good team, and we just gotta eliminate the bad, because historically that's when people have committed the worst atrocities of history, basically, where they're just convinced of their own rightness and rectitude. And so they become willing to do anything to like drive out what they see as the evil.
And that's just playing into war, like the pattern of war. You're like, oh, I don't like that, so I'm going to fight it. I'm going to go to war with it. And when does that actually work? Like, does the war on drugs work? No. Does the war on terror work? No. Because even if you defeat the enemy, they're going to come back and get you later. So the only way to neutralize negative forces is with something different, like consciousness, like understanding, looking for the common thread and not trying to fight each other. That doesn't ever help anything, really. Yeah,
you chop the head off the monster, 3 more grow back. It's perfect metaphor from mythology.
So how do we break out of this pattern of polarization and this endless shadow projection? You said consciousness. Like, what do you think? How can we bring that down to a more practical level?
Okay, just like self-awareness. When you find yourself looking outside and judging other people, just kind of see it as, oh, there's something in me that I don't like, and I'm trying to avoid it by putting it outside of me. When other people are triggering you a lot, there's probably something you need to pay attention to yourself. So I always talk about shadow work, just like looking at the emotions of yours you don't want to admit to having, whether it's jealousy or sadness, fear, anxiety, all the things that you kind of wish you didn't feel, that's your shadow. And you really have to look at that. It all starts with the individual, because people like to say like, oh, it's this generation's fault, or the people on this political party are the ones ruining the world. It's like, okay, it starts with you then. Internal change is how you change the world. Even something small like recycling. If you don't like pollution, okay, make sure you're living up to your own standards with that. What does that mean?
Should always start with yourself instead of trying to tell other people. to do the things you want them to do, pay for the things you wish should be funded, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't live up to your own standards, how can you expect others to do the same?
Yeah, and everyone else is made up of individuals, so if you start with you, that's the best way to change anything, really, because people will see your example and they'll know it's possible to do what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's how you change things.
The idea of like the chasm between just like individual improvement and collective improvement is such an illusion, because the collective is just a collection of individuals.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really change that without changing things on the individual. You can like maybe whip people along for a while and get them to do things, and as long as you keep forcing them to, but as soon as you stop doing that,
it's not very efficient.
It's
so.
really inefficient, and it just causes a lot of expenses and suffering along the way, and doesn't even create a sustainable result.
It's like fear is an efficient motivator for a little while, but it's so inefficient compared to getting people involved with their passion or inspiration. That's just so much better on every level, no matter what you're talking about.
I think as well another technique for breaking out of the polarization and the endless kind of hostile tribalism dynamics is being willing to start entering a space of not knowing in life in general, basically just becoming way less certain, like actually attempting to cultivate a beginner's mind where
staying
you're
in the question.
because I think a big thing that fuels this polarization and that allows people to fall into these traps repeatedly and become embroiled is that they're falling prey to the human tendency to want certainty so badly, because our fundamental predicament is, or our situation as humans is, we're in this ridiculous cosmic mystery. No one truly knows what's going on here, what consciousness is, what any of this is, and we're in this position of major ambiguity, mystery, and groundlessness. But that situation is actually too overwhelming for most people to deal with, so they crave certainty, and therefore they become willing to latch on to whatever dogma they see in their view, and so they jump into conservatism or liberalism or some other ideology because it offers them the comfort of certainty. But unfortunately, that just we kind of have to snap out of that as human beings at this point, because historically that's just led to people becoming certain that their team, that their ideology is correct, is the best one, and then they become willing to do atrocious things to people who are outside of that. And if we don't transcend that, given the exponentially increasing technological and weapon-based power that we're now gaining as a species, those bad decisions to demonize the outgroup and try to kill them are increasingly going to have global catastrophic consequences for all of us.
Yeah, and another thing that I just thought of is like, anytime you ascribe to an ism or an existing ideology, you have to give up part of your self or your own reasoning faculties, because you're buying
questioning.
Yeah, you have to buy into something that's meant to fit a large group of people, so you're sacrificing your humanity, your ability to reason, and you'll start seeing everything through that tunnel, and you'll start just kind of like rationalizing everything to keep your belief alive. And that's why I think isms are pretty poisonous in most cases.
They are very toxic.
Yeah, the only meaning I found is just finding my own way through things. I used to think like, if I want a spiritual belief, I have to, believe in this religion or that one, or atheism or this ism. And then I realized, no, I can kind of create my own thing actually.
The thing that's so crazy about these days is that like even science has kind of abandoned the scientific mission of just looking for answers to instead act like we have all the answers, and pushing all this dogma and like fighting against the questions. Anything that like questions the status quo of the theories, which are like the mainstream thing, that it gets shut down so much. Like, and it's like even the greatest scientists and inventors and so on, like Einstein and Newton and stuff, they were not of this kind of mindset. They were staying in the question. They were saying, we don't know what we know. We don't know what we don't know. But it's like the people now who are pushing this like scientific, skeptical worldview are like, they're not even doing science. They're just like learning things from a book that actual scientists have figured out. And then they're like, we are the scientists.
And then ridiculing.
They're just like acting like the modern priests and zealots of our time. Like we have the answers, or like these people, our Messiah, Einstein, figured out this answer, so now you have to follow it, instead of like doing what Einstein did and trying to figure things out.
I feel like the spirit of science is very in touch with the mystery of life,
exactly,
and trying to figure out what the mystery is, not denying there is a mystery.
Right. It's like if astronomers or whatever would stop looking at the planets and just make up a new astrology, like, oh, we know what's out there. It's like there's no point to look anymore. It's just that's the opposite of science, you know.
Yeah, true science never arrives at the final answers.
Yeah, exactly.
It's literally an endless iteration. It always accepts that what we currently have are our best models at this time.
Theories.
Theories, models, but that science is literally meant to be a process of constantly disproving and overthrowing kind of the current paradigm and the current models to just perpetually refine them and get closer to truth. And yet in every age, you find that there are a lot of people that want to fossilize the current scientific orthodoxy and turn it into a dogma, and they think, oh, we've finally arrived at the final answers. We're, of the several hundred-year history of science, it's been punctuated by these endless paradigm shifts, but no, we've finally arrived at the paradigms that we can just set in stone and say, yes, these are the correct ones. It's like, what are the chances of that?
And then once you do that, it's so hard to accept new information, because even when people are making new discoveries, people will be like, wait, no, but then we'd have to rewrite everything if we accepted that. So people will literally put blinders on and ignore facts to support their own theories, like their own isms.
And the thing is, like, social media kind of caters to this desire to just stay in your ism and push your ism on people and just communicate with other people who are in the same filter bubble that you've created to just verify or validate your own, like, prejudice and so on. Just creating echo chambers, and
absolutely. It's very dangerous, and we can't forget that, these scientists who a lot of people are putting on a pedestal, they're also human beings, and they're subject to this same human tendency to want to latch onto certainty so badly. And so many of them are basically, they've been so immersed in the current scientific paradigms and the current scientific orthodoxy. In a lot of cases, they've staked their careers around the current paradigms and the current orthodoxy, and they're receiving funding based on the work they've done, like supporting a current paradigm or orthodoxy. There's massive incentive preventing them from they're hugely counter-incentivized to actually prioritizing the truth above all else. It's like there's just a lot of gravity pulling them toward reifying the current paradigm in which they're operating. And so unfortunately it's really tough, because science is one of the best kind of like the ongoing vast institution of many people working on science is arguably one of the best kind of bullshit detectors that we have as a species. And yet at the same time, you also now really need to have this healthy skepticism of science, because you have to see that it falls prey to the exact same dogmatizing tendencies of every other human truth-seeking institution.
And to bribes.
We should be skeptical of everything outside of us, like seeking truth out there. I don't care how smart the person is. You should verify everything within yourself, depending on what it is, obviously.
Yeah. It's like these people who claim to have attained enlightenment and have the answers for everyone else. It's you know they're up to something bad when they start spouting that kind of stuff.
It still doesn't necessarily align with you anyway, like especially when it comes to spiritual truths and stuff. You can read something in a book, but until you verify it for yourself, how can it be truth for you? That's kind of how I see it.
That's been a huge paradigm shift for me the last year or two as well. Just like reaching a point of valuing my own first-hand experience of the world and my own intuitive compass of like what is useful and resonant for me in my life, valuing that as my most fundamental source of understanding about the world. And I want to supplement that with, external sources and wise and brilliant thinkers and stuff, but my most fundamental compass has become internal, I would say, in my own first-hand experience.
Yeah, me too. We made a similar shift with that.
Yeah, it's like Terence McKenna had that great quote where he said, like, you have to take seriously the notion that understanding the universe is your own responsibility, because at the end of the day, your own understanding is the only one that's going to be useful for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people just want to outsource that entire process. They're just like, oh, that, they don't trust themselves at all, because we're not taught to trust ourselves. We're actually taught by the education system that the experts have already found the answers and they're in the back of the textbook, and all you need to do is memorize the answers and regurgitate them. You don't need to think for yourself.
You don't need to understand them. You just regurgitate the phrase, the words, the magic formulas.
Yeah.
And literally all of our conditioning teaches us to ignore our own feelings. Like, what kid wants to get up in the morning and go sit at a desk for 8 hours instead of playing outside? You learn early on that you have to shut off your natural urges. Like, your own feelings don't matter at all.
Yeah, and even like if you ask a valid question to a teacher, you're probably getting punished for it because the teacher has an ego. She's a human being and doesn't like to be questioned, or have to answer questions she doesn't have the answer to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you don't manage to shut down your natural urges, they'll just medicate you as a child to shut them down for you.
It's really fun.
So yeah, as adults, a lot of us are just so lost. We're like, oh, intuition's important, but I don't even know what mine is saying because I'm so used to ignoring it. Like, my intuition has been telling me every day, don't go to this job, I hate it, but I have to do it anyway. And eventually it's like you don't even know what your own guidance is saying. So it's kind of a long journey back to yourself after that. Or it has been for me anyway. It's
Absolutely.
ongoing.
That makes me think of another topic that we've been talking about, which is sort of the process of actually realizing that you're not satisfied within like whatever the 9-to-5 or the rat race or the traditional kind of work paradigm, and having the courage and honesty to admit that, and then starting to carve your own path out of that. And that's something that you two have managed to do quite well the last few years. You've kind of dropped out of the traditional life scripts of your respective societies to become nomadic kind of world travelers working on the internet. I'd be curious to hear a bit of your story about how you've managed to do that.
So I never did very well in school. In high school, I think I had a 1.04 GPA. I just despised it. I didn't like doing homework. I didn't want to be there. So I didn't really care about it. I never went to college. So my jobs were my most prestigious job was working at a hotel front desk. So I didn't have very much to leave behind. I always wanted to travel, so I just pretty much took 6 months and worked a bunch of overtime hours, minimum wage, and saved up. My dad let me stay with him, so that made it a little easier to save up enough money. I think I had like $4,000. And I just went to France to stay with a friend and kind of work with her. Then I met him. And I decided I don't want to go home. Like, I got a taste of the freedom. And I was just like, I'm staying and I'm going to figure it out. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. So we did some like kind of work away volunteer stuff where you pretty much work at people's houses or in their yards in exchange for room and board. And then I had about $20 in my bank account and was starting to get really freaked out. And out of desperation, I found freelance writing, which is what I do now. Pretty much scouring Craigslist for hours and hours every day, sending out hundreds of emails. And if I didn't have desperation driving me, it would have been very hard to make that change. So anyone who wants to do it, I think you should just thrust yourself into it and force yourself to have no other option, because you'll be amazed at how resourceful you become with desperation.
Yeah. Probably the biggest incentivator for... Yeah.
I think a really important nugget that I heard in there was that when you got that first taste of freedom, that's what sort of activated in you this tireless determination to continue to be free. It's like, so often that's the case. Like, if you're thinking that you want to escape whatever you're currently in, do whatever you can to give yourself that first taste of something different, like to go travel or spend a month just like in a high autonomy like place with no boundaries. And often that taste of that will be the exact motivation you need that will just kickstart your internal processes, your inner resources. You'll start to summon deeper inner resources, and you'll just really start to feel like there's no plan B. I just like freedom is plan A, and there's no plan B. I just need to be free. And when you do that, and you put yourself in a position of feeling like there's no other option, I just have to do this, and you develop this kind of iron will about it, that's when you're gonna find a way to make it happen.
The idea of going back to America and working in a hotel, I literally was like, no, I would rather just take my chances over here. And I also, the motivating factor of love, wanting to stay in Europe for you is a big one.
Yeah, so there's a bit of a backstory to that part as well. We come from different countries. That's a pretty important piece of the story. I come from Sweden and you come from America. And my story with this, I had an ordinary job and stuff before that too. Before I started traveling, and all my time was pretty much going to working. Where basically I had a lot of money and I had a plan that I wanted to do something with it, but I never had the energy left because I was working so much. I was at some point working 15-hour days, just hard physical labor. But so anyway, when we started traveling, it was nice. It was the first time I'd had like actual, a sabbatical or whatever. So I took a year off, 2 years pretty much, and we were traveling. And basically, eventually, I got to that point as well where I needed.
I ran out of money first.
You
while
ran
you
out
still
of money
had
pretty
some
quick.
saved.
Yeah. And you didn't want me to support you, so you started making your own money. But yeah, so later on, I had a similar thing. So the thing that kept us going was that we had to remain nomadic because I was denied a visa to visit America. So we wanted to stay together, and the only way we could do that was if we were both kind of working online.
And now we both have pretty good job situations with that.
Yeah, we both worked for like breadcrumbs at first, and now we're making good money with the stuff we're doing.
Yeah.
And what was that process like of finding those initial jobs and then evolving them into like better jobs on the internet?
I started with writing like copywriting for like blenders, I think, and it was like half a cent a word. So I would have to sit at my computer for like 10 hours just to make like $50-$60, which was lower than my minimum wage gigs back home. And then I kind of slowly would find ones that paid a little more over time. And
with Craigslist, you were continually
Craigslist, and I started using ProBlogger. There was just this one job I had for a really long time. It's like an e-writing book service, like ghostwriting. It's only a cent a word, and it really sucked, but I made it work because I had no other option, and I didn't want to go home. So even 1 cent a word, I would have to put in really long hours, but I just made it work out of...
We were staying in pretty cheap countries at the time too, like Albania and...
Yeah, staying Bulgaria. In cheap countries helps a lot with making your money stretch further. Bulgaria, Albania.
So that was a good way to get started on our freelancing journey.
Yeah.
So my process was a little bit different though, since I'm not native American or native English speaker even, so it's harder to get the jobs that actually pay, and all of my like credentials or whatever that could help me get a job, they don't really translate well to a different country's system. So
yeah, you're like, I know how to demolish a bathroom with a sledgehammer. Exactly. Will you hire me?
Yeah, so it's been a different journey with that, but it's essentially, I didn't start at quite as low a rate as you did.
And I think I helped a little bit get you the gigs because I was like, oh, I know someone. Here's his email.
Yeah.
So I kind of took the hard way from the start, and for you it was a little...
So I could kind of observe your journey and then later apply what I learned from that and find my way.
Yeah, so a couple of lessons there that stand out to me are, for one, there's this term Geo Arbitrage, which refers to the process of actually moving to an inexpensive country but earning wages in a currency from a different country. Right. So
I didn't know there's a word for that.
You're earning US dollars in Albania, paying $300 a month for an Airbnb on the Mediterranean Sea or something like that. And it's just like, people often ask me, how are you able to afford this lifestyle? And I'm like, you don't realize it's actually cheaper than living in a U.S. city to travel the world. Because if you stick with cheaper countries and stuff. So that's one really big hack. And then I think another just major lesson that I'm hearing is that the internet has really changed everything. Like when it comes to liberating yourself, it's like the opportunities on the internet are boundless. I really believe we're actually only at the beginning of a kind of gold rush of people discovering more and more ways to do increasingly meaningful work on the internet. It's actually like you guys are now starting to record your own videos and move into content creation, and you're trying to start building a foundation where you're actually going to be earning money doing work you're really passionate about.
Yeah, now I write about like the Arizona legal system and sex toys. So that's not really aligned with like my passion. Oh, and office supplies. So like it pays well, but it's like I'm not excited about it. So I want to transition into something a little bit more like heart-based that I'm excited about and care about.
Yeah.
You're not passionate about those things?
I mean, no. I mean, I learned some stuff, I guess.
Oh, that's funny. But yeah, it's just like the internet has opened up these vast new vistas of possibility. We've only scratched the surface. It's really like already kind of a gold rush, and it's in the global economy is just going to increasingly be moving online because manual labor jobs are going to be increasingly automated, and and more we're reaching a point in the global economy where actually it's becoming less and less adaptive to just kind of learn how to listen to an authority figure and slot in and fall in line and do some rote repetitive task. That's going to be increasingly automated. So we're entering an environment in which actually becoming a creative problem solver who's adaptive, who's adaptable and can do non-repetitive creative things that require more thinking and stuff like this is actually just becoming, the norm is shifting that way in the global economy as a whole. And so actually learning the skills you need to start succeeding on the internet is just learning the skills you need increasingly to succeed in the global economy at all.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of future-proofing ourselves in a sense.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it just seems outdated to me to just go sit at a desk for 8 hours a day, like clock in, sit there, go home.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's just because I haven't done it in so long, but it doesn't seem sustainable. It seems like that's gonna be in the past soon.
Yeah, probably to a large degree it's going to decrease and maybe disappear. But also the internet is a gold mine, as you're saying. It's people used to have that dream of seizing the means of production by force or whatever, but then people did it by inventing the internet and different platforms for these kinds of things, where we can now decentralize the money supply or the productivity value supply. It's not just about money anymore, it's about the actual production of value. It's not the alienated sense of creating stuff that you will never use, it's creating your own thing and putting it out there.
Yeah, I mean, think of what the barriers to entry used to be to participate in, say, like the media or music or movie industry or any of these creative industries. It used to be like you needed to find an agent and do some crazy Hollywood magic tricks to get a chance at having. But now all you do is go out and buy a laptop and a microphone and you've literally got a home studio and you can create podcasts, you can create videos, music, blogs. You can create any channel you want. So everyone now has been empowered. Well, I mean, everyone in the developed world who can afford these tools, they're not, totally available globally yet, but most people pretty much everybody watching this is going to be in the developed world. So it's like we've now been empowered with the tools to become our own outlets for any sort of content we might want to create. And when you do that, you create valuable content, you find an audience, you build an email list, and then you devise products, services, events that are going to provide a ton of value to your audience, and you offer those things and they'll give you money for them. That to me is like the optimal, like the ideal way to go about it on the internet. But I think it can be a really good option to find online jobs to support yourself for a while you figure out how to carve out your own niche, because ultimately you want, like you guys are talking about, you want to find work that's actually aligned and feels like, really meaningful to you. And I think the way to do that is to basically, Naval Ravikant talks about like become the best person in the world in your particular area of expertise and keep redefining your niche, your area of expertise until that's true. So you just keep kind of honing in more and more on like, what is my really unique thing. Like maybe it's you're the best yoga teacher for people studying Brazilian jiu-jitsu or something.
Yeah.
Or you're like
Right.
the best tarot reader for mathematicians or something.
Yeah,
Those are
everyone's life
caricature
experience.
examples, but yeah.
Everyone's life experience gives them kind of like a very unique gift to give other people.
Mm-hmm.
And something really smart I've heard recently is like your ideal client is your past self.
Ah, yeah.
So what have you been through before? There's people out there right now that need that wisdom. So
Yeah.
like act like you're talking to your past self, you know? Like I would talk to the self that's sitting at the comfort suites desk hating her life, thinking there's no way out, and be like, hey, there is a way out. Here's how to do it.
Right.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely. I love that heuristic. Like, create the thing that would have made a past version of you go, holy shit, I had no idea how much I needed this in my life. Or like, write the thing that contains the lessons that your 3 to 5 year previous self really needed at that time.
And another thing is
really
like
good
where
way to
you've
go.
been like wounded or hurt the most is also kind of your power, because you know how to heal from that. Like whatever you've struggled with the most, that's how you can help other people.
That's another great one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the internet isn't really just this big unknown where it's so hard to get started like so many people think. Like for me, it's actually been easier. Like if I were to find the job I'm doing now the traditional way, it would have been much harder. Like in Sweden, I have an education in marketing and these kinds of things related to that. But if I were to apply to a traditional marketing firm, even with all those merits and good grades and things, they wouldn't help me get a job. It's such a competitive market and such saturated. Whereas on the internet, people have these very different ways of picking out their workers and the different tasks they come up with. It's so much more organic, so many different tasks. You don't need to like fit into this slot that someone else has created for you. Because there's so many other different slots out there to fill, or even to like help define yourself. People give you so much freedom to kind of work with them a lot of the time. You have a one-on-one with the person you're writing for, and you can kind of help define their product or their service in a lot of ways.
Definitely. To kind of shift gears, I wanted to talk a little bit in this conversation about the importance of ritual and ceremony and rites of passage in life. We were kind of talking about this privately, just talking about how in the kind of modern Western global consumerist monoculture where we're all just like constantly busy trying to acquire status symbols and kind of get ahead and keep up with the Joneses, we've sort of completely forgotten about the vital role of like sacred ceremonies and rituals and rites of passage in life. I don't know if you guys have any immediate thoughts on that subject. I thought we could maybe talk about that for
Yeah, like a lot of ancient cultures, pretty much all of them that I know of, have some type of ritual, ceremony, celebrations, just significant symbolic stuff like that. And just trying to get back in touch with that. It's pretty much the soul of humanity, and we're so cut off from that right now, because I think we're in a really like atheist nihilist type of age right now, and people are just starved for meaning. Like they don't know what they're doing or why. It's like wake up, go to work, come home, and just like watch Netflix for the rest of the day. That's so many of my friends back home and stuff. That's their lives, and you just wonder why are they doing it, and where's the meaning in that? Where's the soul? So for me, what's made a big difference with that is just making like an altar, which is like it's kind of like just a little meditation prayer table where you sit and like gather your thoughts or think about whatever's going on in your life and just make it meaningful to you in some way. So that's a small step you can take for that.
Yeah,
What do you think?
I think definitely in general creating your own personal rituals in your life, whether it's your morning routine or even an evening routine, can be anything you make it, whether it's actually sitting down and praying or meditating, or if it's just journaling or things like that. It's creating some kind of personal routine to create kind of a ceremony, a ritual for yourself.
Connected with nature.
Connected with nature, connected with yourself most importantly. But yes, nature is a great thing.
Or even paying attention to like the moon cycles can be something cool. You know, like, oh, it's full moon. On the full moon, like back home in Omaha where I live, my friends have this thing where every full moon they get people together and play like this jam session and record it, and that's just like their little ritual that they do, like kind of aligning with nature in their own little way. Stuff like that.
I think like kind of more greater collective rituals are also very important, and I think it's something people have always known and are falling out of touch with these days. It's like people talk a lot about like the atomization of society, of how we're all just like individual units now rather than communities and families and so on. It's very divided, very fragmented, very tribalistic in a lot of ways, but because people are like missing the sense of an actual tribe, so we just create them out of our consumption patterns, our political affiliations and so on. Your subreddits even, so like I don't know about America, but in Europe we have like each country has a lot of old traditions where everyone, all ages and so on, different walks of life, everyone gets together and you sing and dance or whatever, and at specific solstices and so on. I think this is something that humans have fallen out of touch with a lot, and I think it has a very powerful way of like unifying people and like creating a sense of belonging, a sense of security, sense of meaning most of all.
I don't know if we have things like that really.
We see like the last vestiges of that type of thing in the holidays that we do have, like Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. These are mass collective rituals, but they've been heavily commodified now. They're like they're major like commercialized. They're major consumerist events now. A lot of times people are actually like groaning about the holidays, like, oh, I gotta go see, like it's like a sense of obligation to go partake of the holidays rather than like this is a chance to remember like the ceremony of life.
Or it's an excuse to get drunk, like, oh, it's St. Patrick's Day, I'm gonna drink green beer now. What? That's probably not what it originally meant. We've sort of got these weird like facsimiles, like facades of what were previously like sacred collective celebrations. Now it's just like you go buy like a pirate costume and get wasted on Halloween or something. Or Easter is like, let's eat chocolate bunnies and have an Easter egg hunt or something.
Right, it's just all about like the products people are pushing.
Mm-hmm. Or you just get together and eat and drink and buy each other gifts. But it's not like Midsummer where everyone dances around with flowers in their hair like in Sweden. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That most human cultures throughout history had these. The year was punctuated by really important collective celebrations and ceremonies that had a feeling of sacredness to them, where it's like now we're giving thanks for the moon and the sun and the earth and the air and the animals, and we're connected to all these things. We see our place in these things. And they also had rites of passage where at a certain age men and women would go through certain kind of sacred initiation rites that would initiate them into adulthood, and it would mark like this is a really important milestone where it's time to let go of some of the more adolescent, juvenile, immature aspects of yourself and step into your fullness as an adult. And I think the absence of this in our culture is utterly apparent when you look around and see that most people are basically overgrown children in adult bodies.
We were just talking about this morning. We were saying like when kids reach like 14, they should be sent to like mandatory boot camp, just like as a way to develop discipline and just grow up. Like not necessarily go into military, but something that gives them some sense of order and discipline, because it's really missing and it's so obvious. Something
that teaches you to like put your ego aside and your reactions, like that even if you have to do something you don't want to do, it's not about you all the time. It's because that's kind of the general mentality of our generation, is like when you're feeling something, that's the end of the world. It's from the helicopter parenting and all this stuff. It's whenever we're feeling a bit upset or sad or angry, we're reacting to something, we'll make it all about that, even if there's something much more important to be focusing on.
Yeah, there's no
And
rite of passage like where it's like, you're 13 now,
Right.
go kill a wolf and don't come home until you do. I think we need that.
So I think like for men, there's at least there's traditionally been that thing for a couple hundred years now, where when you're 18 or whatever, you have to go to basic training and spend a couple months just getting yelled at and working your ass off and like training yourself to do things you probably don't want to do, but it's you carry that, like the gift of that with you into the rest of your life as an adult. And I think it's a necessary thing for most people, and you can see that with our generation we haven't had that so much in the West world, and people are just living in constant reaction, don't know, they have no sense of direction in life, and
or self-discipline.
I think I'm not really in favor, I suppose, of a generalized, like enforced obligatory thing, like everybody goes to boot camp at this age or something like that.
No, but it should be alternatives, like different things that people can sign up to, what speaks to them.
Yeah, right. That's kind of what the way I think of it is, if we start to recognize that we've lost this thing of rites of passage, we can actually start to design our own rites of passage within our communities, within our intimate partners, or within our social circles.
Exactly.
And I think, I think, for instance, retreats or sacred ceremonies can actually serve as really beneficial rites of passage, where you go on, say, a 10-day Vipassana retreat, and you, in your mind, internally kind of set an intention of like, this is going to be an important milestone for me, where I'm going to let go of kind of patterns that are no longer serving me, that are keeping me tied in these kind of juvenile ways of being, and I'm going to step more fully into my power, into my fullness as an adult. You could do that with a meditation retreat. You could do it with, an ayahuasca retreat.
A long hike in the wilderness or something.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. Camino de Santiago or something like that. Like, do something like that. There are a lot of creative ideas. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's sort of like individuals and communities should begin to rediscover the importance of rites of passage, and then creatively begin to design their own in a kind of decentralized way, because I think having a major centralizing structure that enforces a rite of passage seems like probably not the way to go to me, because I'm kind of allergic to giving that much.
It could be easily corrupted.
It's things like that always do get corrupted, and also just the fact that it's something that is pushed on you makes you resist it. Like, you know that it's not for you, and you want to break off. But I think like the ayahuasca retreat thing sounds like so much better in a lot of ways. Like, I just imagine, because like one kind of rite of passage that unofficially exists in a lot of places, like for example for me, when I was 18, it's like you go out to the bar and get wasted because you can legally do it now.
We have that at 21.
Yeah, so you have it at 21, we have it at 18, in some countries even earlier. So if instead of alcohol it was like, okay, you're 18 now, you're gonna go drink ayahuasca, like that would have been like so much better, we have these weird pseudo rites of passage of like it
it's
always
time
rolls
to
around
drink
alcohol.
and drive for the first time, and like it's time to go binge drink with your fraternity brothers or something, and
just weird,
they're like missing
things.
all element of sacredness, and they're actually like often toxic, and just like people literally might die from engaging in these pseudo rites of passage that we've developed. And so I think we need to really consciously redesign this process. As far as one thing you said earlier about creating an altar, I think that's a really good a really good idea for beginning to bring the sacred back into life, because recently Jordan Hall, a thinker that I've been paying a lot of attention to and really admire, I was at the Rebel Wisdom Summit in London. And the thing that maybe stood out to me most all day was when he said, if we don't rediscover the meaning of terms like the sacred, then we really don't stand a chance of sort of course correcting our species and rediscovering a kind of harmonious and sustainable way of living with the planet, rather than like a self-terminating trajectory that it's quite apparent that we're on at the moment. And that resonated really deeply with me, and I think that throughout human history, people have had words that began with capital letters, whatever it is, God or the Tao or nature or the sacred, and there was a significance behind those words and a meaning behind those words that related to a deep sense of connectedness to something transcendent, some deep source of power that was sort of from which reality was emerging and spilling forth and emanating. And we've partially due to industrialization and materialist mechanistic scientific paradigms that view reality just kind of as a cold, unthinking machine that's just kind of spitting out arbitrary results, and we're just kind of motes of dust, like kind of insignificant specks walking around in this cold, dead maze.
I reject that much. No.
We've ended up utterly disenchanting the world, basically. The world has lost the sense of the sacred and the enchanted, and that's part of why we treat the world like it's just waste
Trash
product.
can.
We're just monkeys on a rock floating through space. Like, if you want it to be that way, sure, but you could give it so much more meaning than that.
Yeah, we can't course correct because we don't see it as something sacred, like you said. If we don't see it as something sacred, what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Like, we're just gonna die anyway, so who cares? Like, for me, a big, like, just waking up to the fact that I'm a soul and not a meat robot has been really life-changing for me, and that there's a lot of different things that contributed to that, but that was a big turning point. Just letting myself believe, maybe there is life after death, maybe spirits exist, maybe it's not all just what I see right now. Was huge. If I think I'm a meat robot, I don't even want to. What's the point of anything?
Exactly. And then life becomes very. It's almost like we need some kind of belief in order to not just be run by some kind of sense of fear of death. Because I think that's kind of what the whole materialism thing is now, is people are so afraid of death that everything becomes about surface stuff, everything becomes about numbers, efficiency, concepts. So it's like before I let myself believe in something greater, and I just had that nihilistic, materialistic worldview, is everything was just about, taking as much as possible, finding the best stimulation and so on. It's because if life has no meaning, then what are you supposed to do? So like when you start seeing the meaning or letting yourself feel or even create your meaning, life becomes so much more than that, and you can really focus on doing something that is by you and for you, and actually do something for the world.
My initiation into the spiritual is kind of weird. I just started having a lot of paranormal experiences to where I couldn't deny that there's some weird stuff going on that I don't know about. Like, I was literally like, what is going on? I can't explain this logically. Clearly there's something more to reality. There's something unseen because it's interacting with me, like, on a daily basis. So I'm really thankful for that, actually.
Yeah, and I think it's an important point to note as well that you can kind of begin to find your own truth and your own intuitive kind of knowing and understanding within yourself without turning that into a dogma and having the idea that, like, I found the truth, I know the absolute truth, the final answer is for everyone at all times. You can develop a strong sense of intuitive knowing about kind of, maybe you have a strong intuition that there's life after death, or that we're not just meat robots, or that the world is actually charged with a certain, like, aliveness and sacredness that we've lost touch with. Or that love is, like, the answer and the greatest healing force in the universe. You can feel these things really deeply on, like, a heart level without making the perennial human mistake of wanting to fossilize them into an ideology, like a dogma, and say, I've got it, write it down, make a Bible out of it, like,
you can
and
be
then
like, you can just be like, hey, this feels right, I'm gonna test it out. Here's my hypothesis for now. This is what I do. I was just like, maybe there are spirits, maybe the soul is real. I'm just gonna live as if and see if it clicks. Do my own little experiments and see what happens. And that's how I found my own truths. Just being willing to think, like, maybe I don't know everything. Let me test this out.
Yeah, I think that ironically, we've talked in this discussion about the human tendency to want certainty so badly and want the comforts of certainty, but ironically it's when you open up to the mystery and the unknown and you realize, oh my God, there's actually so much more going on in this universe than we commonly realize, and they're all, like, we don't understand what's going on in the slightest. All the biggest questions are continuing to be debated by the brightest minds of all time, and we're just living within this ridiculous mystery. When you start to realize that, it can be frightening, but then that is what begins to re-enchant the world, I think, because it also unlocks a sense of wonder, a sense of, oh my God, I'm part of like a living mystery, rather than like, oh, I'm just a meat robot in like a cold machine that we've already figured out and like mapped out. It's instead like, wow, I don't even actually know what this tree right in front of me is. Like, we came up with the word tree and we put it on this, and our minds want to think we know what it is because we have a word for it. But in fact, if you strip away like the filter of linguistic categorization and you experience the raw visceral reality of just the bark-clad earth claw like bursting from the soil, you can get in touch with a way of perceiving where you're just like, yeah, no one actually even can really say where this came from, because to say where this came from, you'd first have to go all the way back to the origin of everything, which may or may not even exist at all. I mean, okay, so scientists, the most popular theory is that everything began with a Big Bang. It's like, well, what was the space in which the Big Bang occurred? What preceded
Right.
that sudden emergence of massive energy and matter, and what set it in motion? How could there have possibly been just nothing? It's like, I think existence is eternal, personally. I think there's like no beginning and end. But that's just a suspicion, and not something I'm interested in dogmatizing. But yeah, when you just start to open up to realizing we don't actually know the answers, we don't have the final answers, you can just begin to have this sense of wonder and curiosity about everything, which to me is really fundamental to spirituality as well. This attitude of wonder and curiosity, and just like, I'm going to find the answers for myself.
Yeah, and everyone who created all these different religions and belief systems, they were just people who decided, hey, I'm going to try to experiment and find my own way. Yeah. And then they found something. So why can't you do that, Just believe in yourself enough to think that you have worthwhile ideas.
Yeah.
Definitely. If some random guy in the 1800s could do it, then you can too.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then as well, at the same time, there's this kind of slightly counterpoint to that I wanted to bring up earlier, which is that in this current moment, we have people like the new atheists who sort of want to entirely throw away the history of religion and everything that's kind of been built and constructed previously, and just say, oh, humanity's and maybe I'm caricaturing them a bit, but there's this strong sense among certain crowds that like humanity's history of religion is basically just a giant mistake, a giant hallucination. This is just a really dysfunctional mental operating system, and we need to just root it out completely. And there's some truth in, there's obviously been immense dysfunction in organized religion, but the fact that billions of humans throughout history, the vast majority of humans who ever lived, found tremendous value in religion, it should be a signal to us that it wasn't just a hallucination with no value. And so we also have this tendency to want to throw away what people have built before us. But actually, I think if we throw away religion entirely, we're going to throw out like some really important babies with the bathwater, basically. And so this connects to the entire discussion of ritual and the sacred, because religion has historically been for human beings this structure that kind of creates those rituals and those ceremonies and those celebrations, and is where ideas about the sacred are found, and where we weave these mythologies to tell stories to help us make sense of the world. And it's been like a binding community forming agent as well. And so there are just different aspects of religion that are really valuable that we don't want to lose touch with, but we kind of need to learn how to reintegrate those in a non-dogmatic way, so that we don't fall into the trap of just believing this book has all the answers, it's the word of God, we need to adhere to this, and we can't think for ourselves. That is not the way to go. And yet this phenomenon of religion serve these really important purposes that we need to reintegrate, I think. And so, yeah.
It's been step along our evolution as humans, as a society, and so on to use the religion. It's like, you know, kind of like training wheels, and we needed them to learn to ride a bike, and some people still can't keep their balance, so they need religion or something like it. I don't think we should do away with it altogether. And if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective or whatever, before religion, what was there? There was tribalism and so on. And it wouldn't have been possible to just gather all these like hundreds of thousands of people and later millions and billions of people under like one shared thing if it hadn't been for religion. So we went from tribes to kingdoms, countries, empires, and so on, and entire like groups of countries standing together against some dangerous outside force, much thanks to religion. I think it led to a lot of bad things as well, and we are past that now. I just don't think we should do away with every element of religion.
No, it's obviously serving an important function if it's been so widespread and continues to be. There's obviously something it's providing people with.
Yeah, and even before what we now think of as religion, there was like shamanism and kind of animism and mysticism, and these were like the kernels.
Let's bring that back.
These were, that's what we need to get in touch with, because those were more non-dogmatic. Those weren't ideologies. Those were actually just ways of experiencing the world. Ways of experiencing the world as charged with significance, meaning, sacredness, aliveness, experiencing everything as alive. And I think that authentic experience, the authentic like spiritual and mystical experience that has nothing to do with what your ideas are about what God is or what the sacred is. It's like a visceral experience. That's like the access point. That's the portal to reintegrating the sacred in a non-dogmatic way.
So isn't that called theosophy, where the belief that God can be something directly experienced?
Maybe. I don't know much about theosophy.
Yeah, I've been looking into it lately, and that's pretty much, it's the idea that the divine is something you experience personally, directly.
Yeah,
in my view, we're basically constantly experiencing the divine, like we're swimming through a reality that is charged with divinity and sacredness, but we're like blocked from perceiving that dimension of reality because we're so locked into a very narrow reality tunnel that's been created by consumerism, materialism, hyper left brain rationality, that we've been blocked off from these more like right brain, holistic, synthesizing, spiritual, creative like dimensions of reality through which you can kind of break through the linguistic and cultural conditioning filters and instead have this direct experience of like staring someone in the eyes and being like, holy shit, this is like the window to this person's soul. I'm seeing like their life energy rippling out of their eyes, and this is quite clearly not just like some commonplace meat sack like bullshit maze. This is like nothing more.
I'm kind of a conspiracy theorist at heart, but I think that the fact that we're cut off from our spiritual nature is not an accident. It's by design. I think the powers that be at the top, they couldn't be in control in the way they are if we were in touch with that power. You know, it would make everything crumble. Yeah,
but I think even that is just part of our development. Is like we're going through phases, learning things, we're extracting the golden nuggets of wisdom in each way of being, even if that is a super corrupt society, if it's like communism, capitalism, Nazism, all these things are just like step we've gone through as a collective in order to like extract the greater truths. So that's the religious dogma stage is just part of that, I think.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a new wave of spirituality.
Yeah, I mean it's like even in like human psychology with children and stuff, as we go through stages of development where we're hyper focused on a specific part of like our minds and our bodies and so on. I think it's kind of like this. It's philosophically and evolutionarily we do the same thing. So we just go through, we've been through these like the dark ages and then the enlightenment and then this modern age where we're just hyper focused on our brains. It's like we live our entire lives just up here, just chasing experiences, or even just like chasing theories, taking everything in as like a second-hand experience almost. It's like hearing from other people, reading in books, consuming entertainment, movies, video games, books, and so on. I think this is just another stage we're kind of coming out of now, or we're coming back into another more creative phase of people expressing themselves.
Hopefully coming back to the heart, because I think we just deny our hearts so much, just our emotions and just being feeling beings and being in our bodies. We're just very up here, just dissociating with the rest of us all the time. Because you kind of have to in order to function in our society as it is. You can't be in touch with yourself and sacrifice yourself at the same time.
Yeah. It's been a very like collective oriented era of humanity, where I think more like the individual kind of dignity and sense of direction is coming back out again, and that is more from the heart rather than from just thinking in concepts.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Completely agree with reintegrating the heart and the body. You know, these like we think of our brains as just like the seat of intelligence, but the body is constantly like regulating itself, and our entire nervous system is just constantly engaging in so many processes that we could never possibly control or govern consciously. It just intuitively knows how to heal itself and do a ridiculous number of things. And our hearts, our bodies, our intuitions have other forms of human intelligence that are arguably older and perhaps wiser in a lot of ways than the younger, more narrow, like spotlight consciousness of the linear, rational, like conceptual mind. And so I do think, we need to tap into intuitive heart level intelligence and move more toward like a trans-rational or like super-rational kind of stage of human development, which is what Emil's talking about, like these kind of stages of the evolution of consciousness. We do seem to have been currently in this kind of hyper-rational stage, and now it's time to, like in spiral dynamics, the theory of human development, they talk about how every additional stage like transcends and includes the previous stages, and so now it's time to like enter a new stage that transcends rationality but still integrates it and includes it in its proper place as like a useful tool, but also then reintegrates like the shamanic and the mythic and the heart level and all these other dimensions of the human experience that we've largely lost touch with in this.
They're meant to work together. That's why we have all these abilities. They're meant to all be used. We're not supposed to deny our hearts in favor of our intellect. They're supposed to work together. But instead they're just always at war with each other, and it's like one has to win over the other, and it's like we're bumbling around in the dark.
It's like the thing we're often talking about with the fragmentation of the disciplines of science, where basically science has become these different branches that don't communicate with each other. It's like biology, chemistry, and physics. They're technically one and the same, but we treat them as different things. And then like neurology and psychology, like what are they without each other? It's pretty strange. And they all came from something that was originally kind of like one whole, and now it's just exploded into these pieces. And in a lot of cases, we have answers in each of them that would form a chain to like the greater answer, but they refuse to connect the dots because we're different disciplines and we don't deal with that stuff. Like we don't believe in these biological things because we're psychologists or we're physicists. So for example, the fact we know like scientifically we have proven over and over that like our thoughts affect our moods, right? Other studies have proven that the mood affects like the chemicals in your body. And other studies have proven that a lot of those chemicals are toxic if they linger in your body. And yet other studies have proved that this toxicity causes like certain diseases or mutations or so on in your body over a long period of time and so on. So we have like this entire chain of logic that like, okay, your thoughts can actually make you sick or it can help you heal.
But that's still a woo-woo idea.
Yeah, but that's a woo idea because society or science hasn't like connected the dots yet, even though they could. You could make a study that like connects the dots, but they just don't.
Right. So we need more cross-disciplinary and integral thinking that wants to pull the pieces of truth from wherever they may be coming from and integrate them into this larger picture. And I totally agree that I think a vast portion of illness and disease is actually psychosomatic in some way, and it's originating from some psychological dysfunction or repressed emotions that people aren't dealing with that you bottle it up and you push it away, but it doesn't go away. It actually just like festers and then it emerges as sickness. So.
And an example of that is like pretty much everyone accepts that you can hold stress in your neck and shoulders. You know, when you're really stressed out, you get tense up here and it starts to hurt. That's common knowledge. There's nothing woo-woo about that. But the fact that if like a yogi says that you can store emotions in your hips, you kind of think like, oh, that sounds a little silly. Why is it such a leap from that to this? It's pretty much just like the next logical step.
Yeah.
That you can hold emotions in all different parts of your body. And I think it's just a block of like the energy flow, like not breathing deeply enough, not having proper posture, just not filtering your emotions and releasing them.
It's all part of the same thing, and we tend to neglect our bodies in modern societies. Like, people think the body doesn't matter. You just sit all day, you eat junk, like, that's just full of toxins and made in a factory. It's nothing like the food we're actually designed to eat. And we're not supposed to sit in a chair all day. Like, that's not good for our body, and that's just the norm these days. It's like we're neglecting this, just treating the body as like some kind of host for ourselves that helps carry us through our daily lives, but we don't even take care of it. It's like I don't know, it's crazy. It's like you wouldn't do that to your car. You wouldn't do that if you like had a pet or something. It's like you gotta take care of this. It's just as much yourself as your mind is. We're not just floating egos that inhabit these bodies.
And your body's wise. It will tell you if you're doing something wrong. If you have an ache or pain in your body, that's not just whatever. It's trying to tell you something. It's there for a reason.
You shouldn't just numb that or try to distract yourself. It's like figure out what's causing you the pain and heal it. And that's the thing. Most medicine doesn't even aim to heal you. It aims to numb the symptom rather than heal it.
Oh, absolutely. That's a whole nother can of worms. Like how the medical system treats people as kind of like machines and just tries to like, oh, we just need to put a little oil in here or pop some pills in there, and
I don't care where it came from.
Just turn off the check engine light instead of fixing the problem.
It's all these band-aid solutions and not really seeing people as full complex human beings and treating the root causes.
Did you know doctors aren't even required to study nutrition? They don't even have to learn about that.
They don't even have to know anything about it.
It's really silly.
I wonder if they're required to study psychology very deeply and trauma and like the psychosomatic
there's
origins
separate disciplines.
Oh god,
completely separate.
No crosstalk there.
We have a lot to learn, a lot to integrate. One final point I wanted to jump back to that I wanted to make earlier when we were talking about spirituality and religion. I just think this is an important kind of nugget, is that if we deny the fact that mankind has this deep religious drive, this deep drive to transcend and be part of something greater, and we just try to throw away religion and throw away like healthy, non-dogmatic spiritual ways of channeling that drive, then that drive tends to just get displaced and transposed onto other areas of human life. And so what I mean is, it's no coincidence that as we're seeing increasing secularization across the West, we're seeing people become basically religiously dogmatic about politics and about science and about these other areas of human life. It's like if you take away religion, people will just turn something else into a religion. And so people are fiercely religious about their politics and about scientism and all these other isms now. And so we need to recognize mankind's deep religious drive, deep drive to transcend the individual self and be part of some larger like movement and feel connected to some larger thing. And we need to learn how to channel that in a healthy and non-dogmatic way toward like, maybe non-dogmatic spiritual communities and such, rather than
It's not a weakness to want to feel connected to something greater. It's the most human thing about you, and you're gonna find ways to do it either way.
You're literally born by another human. You couldn't exist without other humans. Your society was built by other humans, and you're connected whether you want it or not. No man is an island.
Deeply interconnected. That reminds me of a shaman in Costa Rica last year told a group of us, loneliness is an illusion. Like we're always deeply connected to so much more than we know. And if we can tap into that and remember that and cultivate that in our day-to-day lives, cultivate that connectedness, then we can be in touch with this more expansive reality where we're not just isolated in these skin sacks and all alone in the universe, but rather we're an inseparable piece of the grand process, the grand mysterious process of nature itself. So maybe that is a good place to...
I don't think I can top that. That was very nice.
Okay.